I'm Gill Whitney, and this is Newell Hampson-Jones. I'm from Middlesex University, and Newell's from the British Standards Institute. Our talk is basically on an issue I had with a module I teach at Middlesex University, and how I got Newell involved to try and solve the problem, really. So the talk is about the teaching of formal standards and why we brought this in to a module for second year students on project management. So these are second year computing science students, and in their second year they do a project management module, and they have all the issues of technical students trying to do something outside their comfort zone. Why I knew of Newell's work and why I considered standards is because as well as doing teaching at Middlesex, I do research, and I'm also on a number of standards committees, and that picture shows me definitely not asleep in a standards meeting at the end. I'd like to point out, definitely, I just looked like I was asleep, but I'm actually wide awake.
Which one was you? One on the right?
Oh, the one on the right who looks asleep, yes.
Definitely.
Right, definitely wide awake. All right, so it's a module called Professional Project Development and Management. It's taught to second year students. It's got, I suppose, three main aims, this module. One is to give them project management skills, because our courses are accredited by the British Computer Society, and that's part of the accreditation rules. The second is to help those prepare who are going to go on placements between their second and third year, to give them some ideas of business so that when they go out they can actually work. And the third thing is to actually enable them to help to write the individual project proposal for their third year individual project. And that's one of the things that they have the most problem with. Now, the module is taught to about 400 students across the world. We teach it in Hendon, it's also taught in Dubai, Hong Kong and Malta. All of them following the material, but with local tutors. The students are predominantly male. They're also predominantly very young, 19 and 20 years old, and they're very technically gifted, and they've got technical skills, but a lot of them are dyslexic, a lot of them don't like writing, and a lot of them don't really like exploring ideas. They like technology for what it can give them, but they can't necessarily take the next step to imagine what they could do. And this brings them a huge problem when they're trying to think of an individual project. And especially, this year we've got a huge number doing apps on restaurant management and queue management for restaurants, and it's just because somebody had the idea and they pass it on. But what we want them to do is actually to become more creative, so that their third year project actually makes the most of their skills, so they can actually show off as much as possible. So, because of my background in standards, I've read a bit about using standards to teach creativity, and that's why I got Newell involved this year, and next year we're going to get him even more involved with the module, and his ideas even more involved, to get students to be more creative. So that's the end of my bit of the talk.
Got up more, I say. Right, so, do you want to do anything about that slide? Or?
No, you can go on.
Okay. So, my idea really is that my issue is that standards are completely misrepresented, I think. People see them much like here. They're regulatory, they're painful to get through, they're just completely ridiculous documents. But that isn't actually how standards really are seen, especially elsewhere in the world. So it's very, very odd that we think of that in the UK. So the idea is to get rid of that idea and turn it on its head and completely change the analysis and ask what really are standards. So obviously they're essential. So in terms of teaching, we have to teach about things like the CE mark, which isn't linked to standards, and the kite mark, which very much is. Then we also have to do obviously testing and things like certification so people understand that they are going to run into testing and certification in their working lives. We also go for the usual stuff, like the different types of standards. A lot of people might know about ISOs, but they don't know how they're linked into European and British standards. And very few people know about PAS standards, as if anyone was in the talk I was in earlier where I raised a PAS standard will know it's very difficult to actually get people to understand the difference between the two. Then we also looked at standardisation bodies, so people understand BSI, ISO and CENELEC, and the idea of international, European and the UK. And then also the standardisation process is important. So that's all kind of like the very, very boring, very standard lecture people stuff out of the way. But what I really wanted to do was to teach two other ideas. One of them is that standards can actually be incredibly engaging. And to teach how engaging they can be, we looked at standards development through the websites and the web tools that we offer. Now, BSI has done a massive project over the last few years where we've actually tried to look at getting more public engagement in standards. This is one of them. It's a standards development website. And this, if you look for a specific term, this was a project management class, so we looked for project management, you can see proposed standards that are currently under consideration, which I'll talk about in more depth. The standards that are currently in development, the published standards, including withdrawn and current, but the most important aspect for a student that's researching standards, I think, is the committees. Because it's very, very easy to understand or to learn about the standard on project management, the British standard, but that standard is currently going up, being ascended to ISO level. So there's going to be an ISO standard about project management, which will make the British standard redundant. So if you're not following the committee, you won't know that. And so through your working life, if standard ascends, you could miss out on things. If you don't understand how important it is to actually not just follow individual standards, but the committees themselves. What we also try and do is try and look at ways that we can get students involved from today, or from leaving the lecture. One way is the commenting on draft standards website. In the process, every single standard has a public comment or public inquiry phase. And BSI has a website where you can actually just go on, register, read, and comment. So we've done a look for all the ICT standards there, and we just click on one that we think might be useful, so it's a simple publishing interface. And we just explain, well, you know, you can go home today and comment on the standard. Have a read of it, comment on it, say what you think about it. There's nothing stopping any student or anyone in this room from going home and doing that. And we want to encourage that more often, because the more people who have a look and understand these documents, the better the final standard is. But the most important thing really is the proposals for new standards websites, because again, anyone can propose a standard. I could go home and propose a standard if I wanted to tonight, but I would rather watch football like everyone else here, I think. But what we do is we actually take this as the central pillar of one activity with a number of students, where we create a committee, a standards committee simulation, where we ask them to actually create their own standard. We did this with a class at Middlesex, not on this module, but on a previous module. And we went through this page, and we went through the standards development website, found the committee, and gave each individual a role, and said, you have to represent from their perspective. And then they had to answer all of these questions, and afterwards they had to fill those questions in on the website. What we got was a standard proposal for, and I know Joel's going to hate this, but a web accessibility standard for apps, to see if they're more accessibility for people with issues with sight, dyslexia. And it actually was a very, very good suggestion. And we actually put it towards the committee. I don't know what happened after that.
I think it's still being progressed.
Is it? Oh, brilliant. The other thing that I really try to teach is the fact that standards can actually be innovative. I like to think that if you're an entrepreneur trying to invent a new product, you generally find that it's a bit like an iceberg. Your innovation is just 10% of that. So where are you going to get the rest of that product? Are you going to make it all from scratch, in which case you're probably not going to get it done before you die? Or are you going to go where you know that there's people who've already succeeded, and that's through the standards route? So through that, we looked very briefly at the Titanic as an example. And this is a poster from the Denver Museum of Science and Nature, where they ask a few questions, and it's to advertise an exhibition they're going to have. But a few of the questions in there are actually quite useful. Like, they ignored basic safety rules. So things that are generally process standards were ignored. Things like hull sections built with zinc which is notoriously brittle. Now this is before we actually had formal standardisation invented, but standardisation is essentially knowledge sharing. So understanding that knowledge and understanding that by cutting costs and doing it this way, they're actually causing more harm than good, could have actually gone some way to helping avoid the situation where you did see the loss of 1,500 lives. So in the end we came up with this, and it's a design that kind of made up, which kind of mimics the tube maps. It's easy to understand. Looking at the life cycle of, say, an invention and how you can map standards to it. So when you're looking at, you're starting out and you're looking at the requirements of the architecture, you need terminology standards. Because people need to be able to read what you're inventing, and there's nothing more humiliating than going into a room and saying something, and then people think that's not actually what you think it is. I've been there. Then you've got measurement standards, which are actually really, really important, and more important than people realise. And the measurement standards ensure that your designs later on comply to basically everyone's understanding. But measurement is also, I would say, the most important level and the first area of standardisation we've had societally. The Indus Valley civilization in 3000 BC actually were the first civilization to standardise, and they standardised measures. Then you've got your design standards, your building creating standards, so you've got interface and any product specific standards that might be useful for you. And then you go into your integration testing, which goes back to the understanding of what testing, how important testing is, and compatibility as well. Move to launch, move to quality, but the important thing is that this whole diagram, whilst they're trying to look at standards to make sure their product up from launch and afterwards is effective and as good as it can be for the market, it also means that if it's successful, it itself could become a new standard. An example of this is, I would say, Six Sigma, which is currently being looked at to could it be turned into a standard that could connect into ISO 9000. So we do have examples of things working in the market and being so successful they actually become standards later on. And then at the end of this, we give them a few examples of what standards they could look for and the committee that they should follow. And we also link that back to the standards development website, which is just, I think, the first port of call for anyone who's looking for anything to do with standardisation. We also link to BS0, which is the standard that is written about how to write standards, which might sound very, very complicated, but it's actually really important because it's essentially like our constitution and how we're going to do things. So next year, we're going to actually look at expanding the use of standards in the module. And I think there's a few important points that we need to do. Identifying how formal standards support this area is a no-brainer, but I think actually what's really important, I think what a lot of lecturers forget, is that identifying the most relevant standards and standard bodies is actually more important than understanding what standards are important for that particular area. So if you're in the workplace, it's all well and good saying, oh, I know this standard should be used, I know this standard should be used. But that's not actually applying knowledge to a wider base. You need to understand, well, that standard is relevant, but why? And so what other standards could be relevant as well? Explaining the contribution of standards to this area. I mean, currently, standards make up 2.5 billion of UK GDP. So they do make a massive contribution, but in other countries they make a bigger contribution. But in other countries they're also better trained and have a better, wider understanding of standardisation. And we also need to identify possible standard gaps and suggest how the gaps could be filled, which is, I think, another massive point where what we're doing is just trying to improve the level of standards and the level of standardisation in the country, and hopefully, in the long term, we could start turning upside down that idea that standards are purely there to make life hell and be regulation. So, in a nutshell, that's basically what we've been doing over the last year, and if anyone has any questions, hit me.
Yes.